Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Third channel with this new episode for the Reddit Ask Reddit series. Today's episode: Redditors who work at remote places like forest officers, oil rig workers, etc. What creepy things have you noticed while at work? I was the creepy currents. I live on a ranch off a quiet dirt road. Our distant neighbors nearest house, about 1 mile away as the crow flies, have had issues with people stealing things out of their outbuildings and storage sheds in the area. It was also late in the year, so it was starting to get dark around 6 p.m. So as a result, every time I would see headlights go down our road, I would watch to make sure they weren't stopping on the property. One evening, I see a vehicle going very slowly down the road and come to a stop at the end of our driveway, about 120 yards from our front porch. The vehicle is parked right in front of a 60s pickup I have parked, so I think whoever it might be looking to steal it, or just looking over the property. Whatever the case, I decide to put on a black coat and grab my rifle to go investigate. It's dark out, so I stay out of the headlights of the vehicle so I can get close. I can tell you it's a white van, but I don't see anything else distinguishing about it. When I am about 50 yards away, the van backs up and turns into our driveway. I freeze as the headlights wash over me standing in the middle of my driveway, and I can see the reflective FedEx logos on the side of the van. Needless to say, the FedEx driver probably crapped his pants as he suddenly sees a dark figure standing in the middle of the field in the dark, holding a rifle. Surprisingly, after I try to give a friendly wave and smile, he continues up the driveway to the house, and I get to explain the situation, and we both have a laugh. So that's how I got to be the creepy guy in some FedEx delivery driver's story. Nice break from some of the darker stories here. Well placed tale. Working late at night on a remote mine site, changing out a switch in a substation on the edge of the pit, just me and a quiet room full of gently humming transformers. I finish up and head for the door, and I see three pairs of red eyes staring through the window. Nothing else visible, just blackness and three sets of red eyes. Turns out goats' eyes reflect red at night, and they like staring in windows. Goats who stare at men. I spent some time in the peat swamp forests of Borneo studying wild orangutan. We would go into the forest very early around 4 a.m. One morning there was a clouded leopard on the trail we used to enter the forest. It was just crouched there watching us. We shouted, tried to act big. One of the indigenous people we worked with even took out his slingshot and shot rocks at it. He missed on purpose just to scare it off. It stayed there for a good 5 minutes watching us before it slowly walked into the thick bush off the cleared path. When we walked by, I shined my light to where it had walked to and could clearly see a path of reflective eyes only 3 meters away, crouched watching us pass. Creepy, but also incredibly cool to see one in person for how critically endangered they are. I worked in Canada's north for a few years now in oil and gas. It's pretty creepy when during night shift you realize a moose had just been standing at the tree line staring at you down for an unknown length of time, or finding bear tracks crossing the tracks you just made 5 minutes ago. Honestly, the silence of a snowy forest in the dead of night, hundreds of kilometers away from anything, is pretty spooky. When your only contact to the outside world is a radio channel nobody's listening to, and you feel pretty alone. Windshield says, might as well be in space. I used to work in the Gulf of Mexico on oil rigs for years, and it may not exactly be creepy, but I found it really unsettling. In deep ocean water, the water itself is really clear, so everyone can plainly see all the tuna and barracudas hanging around the rig waiting for the onboard cook to throw off whatever food waste he needs to. Every once in a while, a huge great white shark would swim up from underneath and snatch a tuna, and it would take really less than a second. They're really scary. Brazos River says, I worked for a guy that spearfished underneath the rigs out in the Gulf. He said it was perfect since there were tons of fish underneath and the sharks would never go between the legs, just wait for a fish to leave. Plus, the view was amazing, looking down and seeing nothing but abyss. He loved it. I can only imagine how scared I would be. Not my story, but a close friend. He used to deliver newspapers in his Jeep CJ7, which was lifted and had long throw headlights for when he would go camping or off-roading in it. He would he would be up as early as 3 a.m. to do his rural routes, so he would be alert for deer and other wildlife that might try to cross the road in front of him. He was also big into cryptozoology. He believed in Bigfoot and other cryptids, so his mind was in that zone a lot on those nights and mornings. One early morning he was driving slowly through a curve alongside a pasture when he heard an inhuman wail. He slowed down, and as he came out of the curve, his headlights lit up a pair of eyes that had to be 10 feet off the ground. He stopped, backed up, and tried to get his lights to illuminate whatever it was. He heard the wail again coming from the direction of his eyes, and he started freaking out, thinking he finally saw Bigfoot. As he was scrambling for his camera, his eyes adjusted enough to realize what he was actually looking at. The eyes were a bull's, and they were high off the ground because the bull was currently with a cow. I spent several seasons working in a remote field camp in Antarctica, over 1,000 kilometers from the main station in McMurdo. Once in a while, a skua bird or Antarctic tern would accidentally end up following one of the small planes, a twin otter, out to our camp. Once there, though, they'd basically be stranded with no way to get back to the coast. I'd get out of my tent some mornings and see a lonely tern circling overhead, knowing it was a dead flying bird. It was quite creepy. Along these lines, when birds or seals do die down there, it's so cold and dry that their bodies don't decay either. They essentially mummify. Outside McMurdo's at Scott's Discovery Hut, there is still a perfectly preserved seal carcass from 1912 sitting by the entrance of the hut. Thial Binor says, I was a field geologist in the outback about 12 hours north of Adeline. One day I was driving the truck and saw what looked like a flagpole sticking up in the middle of nowhere. I wasn't anywhere near a farm or anything else that people would be, so I decided to drive over and check it out. It was a dead dog fully impaled on a spike. Like, took some pictures and had my boss call the cops, but the rest of the assignment I was freaked out that some maniac was out there with me. Chief Boldface says, working on ships, there was one night I was on a ship sailing through Alaskan waters, and it happened to be my first night ever seeing northern lights. I can't believe how awesome that was. It made the sky clear, made the night look like it was dusk. We were able to see clearly for miles. Few buddies and I hit the roof, or what we call Lido deck, at 1 a.m. just to gaze at it. An hour or so in, there was six of us on top, nearly the entire crew now. A big white spotted light shines at us. We were near land, but where the spotlight was above the water, and it wasn't low enough to be on a ship. This was very high up. It shined on us for about 15 to 20 seconds. Once the light turned off, we looked to see what it was, saw nothing, no trace of any aircraft or anything. Couple minutes go by and the same light shined on us. This time it was on the other side of our vessel above mountains. Still unable to see what it was, we all saw it. We all have never seen any aircrafts hovering above these waters, especially at 2 a.m. We don't know what it was. We think it may have been some sort of silenced aircraft the military was probably doing drills or something. But anyways, that was one of the weirder things to happen out on the ocean. Riarum says, I used to do agricultural work alone in the field for 10 hours a day, kind of thing. The pure amount of times I heard a sound of running and snapping up to see literally nothing there was horrific. I was convinced that it was surely animals behind the trees for a while, but the weirdest moment was when I heard it loudly from a row of trees next to me and immediately ducked under to see the feet of whatever animal was running by, and there was absolutely nothing. I remember trying to stay calm and walking real fast to the toilet block and sitting there for a good long time before I came back. I never thought I'd be so freaked out in the daytime, but there wasn't a soul nearby for quite a way, and it really amped up my imagination. As a prior deer hunter, I can tell you that thundering noises from a squirrel can sound like a herd of elephants when out in the woods just when all is still and quiet. I grew up in the dark, and my grandparents both had fairly large pieces of land. The one grandmother away had some horror movies playing and a lot of Yeti, Bigfoot, Sasquatch stuff. Needless to say, 10-year-old would sprint from the house every night, would get there, and I was sent to fetch the bags. Worst anxiety in the world being told, hey, go get this from the car after we pulled in late on a Friday. One time when I was around 8 years old, we went to visit Grandma in rural Kansas. She had an old house and the town barely had any street lights, so the night sky was fantastic and full of moons were amazing. So anyway, she had Arachnophobia on VHS. I had never seen it and begged Dad to let me watch it. He said, sure, but you're still sleeping out here in the living room. That night was the longest night of my life. I was in a sleeping bag on the floor with a full moon outside casting all kinds of shadows through the blinds along with moving tree branches. Every shadow looked like a spider to me. My dad just laughed when he saw the bags under my eyes in the morning and said, how'd you sleep? Knowing full well what the answer was. Merchant Seaman here. Nothing particularly creepy. Most of the time, you're too focused or not hitting anything, getting positions fixed, updating logbooks, etc., to really think about paranormal or spooky stuff. But the closest thing to creepy I experienced recently was be a strange transmission over the radio. It started with a series of Morse code beeps, followed by an accented female voice listing off random letters and numbers. Don't know what that was all about. In my brief stint as a rural health nurse, I was quite unnerved by how many of the families I worked with still practice ritual animal sacrifice, even though on paper they identify as Catholic. We have a PTO pump spot that comes out of a canal for our rice fields. When I was 12 years old, my uncle found two bodies dumped in a little sump area where our pump sat. Both of the ladies that were dumped there had the same tattoo, so they think it was gang related, but it was 45 minutes away from where the gang operated. I still look in the hole every time I go by there, and that was 20 years ago. Righteous Meow says, I do a lot of work out in the woods. Creepiest thing was finding some headless doves. I also found sticks arranged in a circle and paint on a tree in the same spot. Not sure if it was part of a ritual or not, but that's what I saw. Here's one I found deep in the woods this year. Wales. Note the moss ball pendulum swinging above it. Rather beautifully, actually. I was going with witches or some sort of pagan tomfoolery. All right. Sasquatchu says I was on guard duty at Camp Phoenix on the outskirts of Kabul in 2011. It was a 12-hour shift and it started at 7 p.m. Around 2 a.m., I could hear what sounded like footsteps running all over the guard tower. Promptly set in my hairs on end, so I pull out my night vision and pray that it's some kids or something. Turns out it's two, three dogs. Giles says I worked as a polar bear guard, as in I escort people across tundra and mountains to protect them from polar bears. Once I saw a snowman totem with reindeer antlers coming out of his head. It was deformed, full of bullet holes, and rather creepy. House of Amon says I've been fishing out in the Gulf of Mexico where they have some oil rigs. This rig wasn't being used from what we knew, so we would get pretty close to it and fish for red snapper. While we were out there, we could have sworn we heard screams of a woman over and over. It was some crazy stuff, but the explanation was the wind making the noises as it blew through the rig. I was serving as a fireman for my nation's compulsory national service. Once we were called into the forest to retrieve a body who was found hanging on a noose deep along one of the running trails. He had apparently uh, hanged himself off a tree. It was creepy. We found a straw doll at the foot of the tree. It was also stabbed with a few red bobby pins in the head, facial area, and there was also an unknown talisman that was half burnt where this doll was sitting. When we took the body down, we had to carry him a few kilometers out of the forest, and halfway along the journey, a previously unnoticed wound on his face started bleeding. One of the men swore that it was bleeding from the same spot as where the bobby pin was struck on the doll, but we could not confirm it as we left the doll where the body was found for the police, passed the body to paramedics, and booked our way out of the area. Alright guys, so thank you all for watching this episode. Subscribe if you're new. If you like the Reddit series, give us a thumbs up. Comment down below any future ideas you would like for future videos. See you all next time, guys. Take care.